Not sure if I'm the only one or am I early. Let's try this one. Yeah, I must have the wrong. Hey, am I on the wrong link or? Oh, I see you now. Okay. Just want to make sure I'm on the right one. Okay, let's see if my can you hear me on my earphones?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry, I'm just trying.
Okay, good. Good. I got them working now. Okay, super. Yeah, I just thought I'd come in a couple minutes early here and test it. Great. And let's make sure, let's see, here's Michael. Hi, Michael Masnick.
Hey.
Hey, good
How's it
seeing you.
going?
Been a long time.
Yeah. How you doing?
Good, awesome. You sound great. There's James Schumark too.
Hey,
Greetings from
James.
Scotland. Och, I the new. You,
Hello.
Jimmy.
Mike's been there before. He's even worn a kilt.
Yeah.
Wow.
Kilt.
I was there with you on Robbie Burns night, right?
Yeah, that's right.
We went around to a few different dinners.
Yeah, a few. After I overpromised the attendance the first one, I remember. But yeah, then we went to the conservative party dinner or something.
That's right.
Yeah. That was funny.
That was
So,
it was entertaining.
Great. Well, we're gonna have a good session. Like James is gonna do the introduction, and then I'll like go in and start like asking you some questions and just kind of let you roll from there, you know?
Sounds good.
And kind of like eventually we'll get to what you are interested to talk about, really. So
Yeah,
I'll try to
cool.
dig that up and let you go. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I can talk about anything.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Okay, James, anything else for Mike before we start?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll record it. We're recording the call.
Okay.
If we need to, if you want us to make any edits to the recording before we make it public, then just let us know beforehand. You never know what you might talk about in today's interesting times that we live in.
Yep. I think I'll be all right, but I'll keep it in mind. Thank you.
Well, you don't know what Mike's going to ask you yet.
That's true.
Yeah, cool. Well, I'll maybe start. I'm a co-host, so let me share my screen.
Sure, I'll start letting people in. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. That'd be
great. Super.
Uh,
Okay, hi Darcy, hi Brian. Priya's here. Hello, Tim. Joshua. Hello, Priya.
Hello.
Super. Hello.
And Mike's got the best audio set up here.
Yeah, he does.
Got a nice sound there.
I come prepared.
I know. I use a Bluetooth headset, but the what's it called? The the signal obviously isn't ideal. But anyway, here's Tim from Florida. Hello, Tim.
Hello.
You got good audio as well. Good. You sound good.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we've got about 20 people, 30 people who've RSVP'd, so we'll give it a little while yet before we kick off with the proceedings. But I'll share my screen, get everything set up.
I had some more also RSVP in Medellin, Colombia, and some in Sterling, Glasgow. So yeah, we had a fair number.
That's great.
Yeah. So we'll see who actually makes it.
I was just on the phone to Davran earlier on, and it got me thinking. He's from Kazakhstan. Maybe we can get a meetup group going in Kazakhstan. That'll be interesting. I'd love to ride my motorbike around the desert in Kazakhstan. Kill two birds with one stone.
Yeah.
Here he is.
Awesome.
Talking of Davran. Yeah, it's great. We've got entrepreneurs from all around the world.
Theodora, hello, Theodora.
Yeah.
Either London or Maine. Maybe at the same time. We're not sure anymore. Great.
Yeah. So Theodora's in an interesting space that you might understand, Mike. All about the news and what we're being fed. So Theodora might have some questions later on. Don't want to put you on the spot though. So how's your day, Theodora?
Good, very good. Busy. Staying busy with my kids.
Oh yeah. That time. Well, and how close to you to London are you, Theodora?
I am in Hampstead, so I am about 20 minutes north of central London.
Oh, right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to be in London tomorrow night. If anybody wants to meet me for a beer or a coffee, I'll be good.
Are you just here for one night, James?
So I'm actually here staying. I'm available Friday evening and Sunday afternoon. So if you want to meet up for coffee or a beer, just let me know. Yeah, it'd be great to meet some more of you in person. Obviously, Zoom has enabled us to meet people from all around the world, but it's also great to shake someone's hand and meet them personally. All right, so I think we'll probably start the meeting off. We've got quite a few people here, I see. We have about, I'm sure more people will come in, but obviously we need to respect everybody's times and agendas. We are obviously very grateful for Mike Masnick being prepared to take out the time and share his wisdom and experience and answer any questions that you guys may have. As the title suggests, it's like a fireside chat, so it's going to be pretty fluid, and there'll be an opportunity for you guys to ask Mike any questions that pop up in your mind. But before we move on, I'd just like to share this screen with you. And this is way back in 2017 when Mike was our guest. So that's like 5 years ago, 4.5 years ago. So it's great that here we are again. Hopefully it will not be what would be 2017 again that we talk next, Mike. I know you're very busy, and I appreciate you helping us out way back then.
Sure.
So yeah, we've been running our meetup groups ever since. Mike and I have never looked back. And also, I'd just like to say we do have some other people lined up to speak to our group, our community. And the next guest speaker is Alejandro Cremades on the 23rd of June. And that will be by Zoom and as well. And also to remind you guys that our £10,000 startup race starts on Tuesday next week. So if you're interested in taking part, make sure you log into our Typeform and sign the rules. The link is here. You can pause the recording or you can take a picture of this with your phone if you've not signed the rules yet. We'll only be giving people who've signed the rules access to the tools that we're going to be using for the £10,000 startup race. But if you don't know about this, Mike, it's a bit like a triathlon for entrepreneurs, and we're putting up a £10,000 cash prize for the winner, and it's kind of based on revenue. But I would just like to say before we move on to the fireside chat that this call is actually part of the Scottish Tech Ecosystem initiative that the Scottish Government has supported. So we're very grateful for them. We had, we had Ash Moria, and then we had
Louis Madeira.
Louis Madeira, visiting us in Scotland. So we're very grateful that we can bring the knowledge and expertise and wisdom and opportunity to connect with entrepreneurs from all around the world. So yeah, just officially welcome you all to the League of Entrepreneurs. For those of you who don't, my name's James Schumark, and my co-founder is Mike Clauser. And Mike is going to be doing the fireside chat with Mike. And after that, there'll be an opportunity for you guys to answer any questions you may have. And then we'll have our breakout rooms. We'll just have 2 breakout rooms, and then we'll close. Maybe not 9 o'clock. We might close earlier than that, 8:30. But I think I should have updated my agenda a little bit there. It's got a bit adrift. But anyway, I'm going to hand over to. I'll stop sharing, and I'll manage the door and just let Mike take over the show.
Okay, great. Yeah, 2 mics here. I'll just kind of I'll get us started in the conversation, and then we'll go from there with some questions. I thought that I kind of frame this the questions a little bit to the prompts, if you will, in terms of like the past, present, and future, because I know there's some people in the call that would be very much interested to hear what you had to say about, what might be in store in the future in the technology landscape globally. But I thought, as far as the past goes, I thought maybe you could just give us, Mike, a quick overview of how did you start Tector? Where did it come from, and how did it, just briefly, like, how did it grow, and where is it now? And then we'll go into more talking about issues after that.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, it's actually kind of difficult to describe because there's all different ways to explain sort of how it got started. But in some way, we're about to hit our 25th anniversary, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. Which is that technically I sort of got it started in the summer of 1997, and that was between years at business school where I met you, and I was basically just trying to keep track of what was happening in the technology world, but really from a business perspective, which I kind of felt there wasn't as much of that out there. There were sort of there were news sources that were kind of sort of hyping technology, but I thought there weren't ones that really sort of understood technology and sort of the intersection between technology and business and how it might impact the future and business models in particular. And so I just started writing a newsletter while I was in business school, and it was sort of a fun side project. I'd send out a newsletter once a week or so. And then, it started to actually get some traction. And I was like, well, that's cool, but I kept it as a side project. And I came out to Silicon Valley, and I took a job at a startup, and kind of spent about a year at that startup, sort of watching it implode, which was kind of an interesting thing to watch from the inside. And all the while, sort of as things got worse and worse at the startup, started spending more and more time writing my newsletter instead of actually working on the startup. And so then I left, and I sort of toyed around with a few ideas, and actually tried to build a different startup, and sort of was working on this other project, which was also just running into some difficulty. And so I was just spending more and more time on TechDirt itself. And so finally someone was just like, hey, wake up. Like, that's the thing that you're most interested in doing. Turn that into a business and stop trying to do these other things. And so that's basically what I did. And so I built it up. Initially, it was sort of this media property, but in order to build it as a business, we built a sort of consulting arm to go with it. And we the whole thing has evolved over time. The biggest thing is like it started as really a focus on technology and business. We've sort of become known a lot more for understanding the not just the intersection of technology and business, but really the intersection of technology, business, law, and policy. And that's really sort of where our expertise is, and we've sort of built that up. We still have a consulting business, though it's changed a lot, and it's a very different kind of thing than it was 23 years ago when we started it. And that's it. We're most people know us for the blog, for TechDirt, which is somewhat popular. And then we do a lot of other work and research, and we do events, and we have a whole business now that we built up over the last 4 years or so, which is the thing that I'm most interested in these days, which is in using games as a tool. So we're building different games as we put it, to understand complexities of today and to explore future possibilities. So we have some games that are built around sort of understanding what is happening now in sort of complex areas, and then others that are really focused on trying to figure out the future. And we work with a lot of partners on that. So like we did a game around trying to understand the future of artificial intelligence that we did with the World Economic Forum. We're working with the United Nations now on some futuristic games. We've done a bunch of games around trying to understand how technology and disinformation could impact elections. We've done a lot. And that's sort of the area that I've been most interested in over the last few years, just because it's kind of different. We just released 2 months ago now, a little less than 2 months ago, we released our very first browser-based games. Most of our games are like getting people together as a group, and running kind of a simulation of some sort. But this is our first browser-based game, and people here might be interested in it. It's called Startup Trail. And it should be we did it with Engine, which is a US based nonprofit focused on startups, on sort of being a trade group for startups. And they every year they come out with a report, an agenda that talks about kind of policy issues that impact startups. And they wanted to see if we could take that agenda and turn it into a game. I think the domain is startuptrail.engine.is.
Okay, yeah, I'll put it up here in chat.
Yeah, you can look at it.
Yep.
Yeah. So if anyone wants to play around with that, it's really sort of exploring like the policy related challenges that startups face. And so that was exciting, just because it was the first one of our games that are sort of, that I can just send to anyone and anyone can play, as opposed to having to, join a group and show up at a certain time, or a lot of the games we end up doing are sort of private events for people. So this was cool. We're working on a few others like that as well. And so there's a lot of fun stuff that we're doing there. So I've sort of gone slightly off track, but that's kind of it's kind
super. Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't realize that. And then how about the Copia Institute?
Right. So
Can you tell us about that too?
yeah, so that is the sort of consulting arm of everything that we do now. So
Got it.
it's gone through some different names and the way it is, but yeah. So for the past 7 years, it's been the Copy Institute, which we described as a think tank, around all these issues. So TechDirt is the blog, and that's what most people know us for. All of the other projects that we do are under the banner of the Copy Institute. So all of the gaming projects come out under the Copy Institute banner. The research reports, we during the pandemic, we didn't really release many research reports, but we now have this big backlog, and we've just finished writing 3 different reports. They'll be coming out under the Copia banner, hopefully in the next few weeks or months. And then we have like another 3 or 4 reports that we're working on as well. So we'll have a bunch of research and reports coming out very soon. And that's all under the Copia banner.
Okay, super. Well, I put up a link for that as well, and we'll definitely keep an eye open for those. So tell us a little bit about, let's go to current now, and like talk about current issues. So what are the areas now, and maybe you could give like a brief background on why they're of interest to you, but like what are the areas, at that intersection of technology, business and policy and law right now that kind of most interest you, that inspire you most to explore and write about, and why?
Yeah, I mean,
So I'd like to
there's
hear about that.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is there's a lot. I'm not that narrowly focused, but I'll give you a few things that I'm particularly interested in. On the policy front, certainly, there's a lot of interest right now in sort of like how the internet itself should be regulated, and that takes a number of different forms. There's obviously like antitrust regulations, privacy regulations, things around content moderation. And so I'm deeply interested in sort of where all of those discussions are going. I was going to say deeply frustrated, because that's the honest truth. I think most of those discussions are going in really sort of dangerous directions. I think that will do a lot of harm. And so, but I'm sort of very, very spending a lot of my time actually working on that. And some of that is, some of the research that we're doing is around, different policy options that have been out there, maybe some alternatives to different policy options, trying to understand that. One of the research papers we're working on is looking at a number of the different policies that have been put in place over the last 5 years or so, and how well they've worked or how well they have not worked. So I'm spending a lot of time working on that. One of the things, another area that is perhaps somewhat related to this that has been really interesting to me, is sort of this move to look at more decentralization of the internet. And this comes in many different forms, and there are different people have very strong opinions about it, and there are different camps. So some people talk about Web3, some people talk about D-Web as distributed web or decentralized web. And I think there's a lot of really interesting things happening there. I think it's a really sort of fraught space, because there's also a lot of like terrible things happening there and scammy things happening there. But I think at the core, there are some really interesting ideas, and that if they were well thought out and well executed, could really change the way the internet works in a much more beneficial way, and could deal with a lot of what people view as the problems of the current internet. But there's a really good chance also that everything could go really bad. So trying to encourage people to go in the right direction with that stuff, trying to understand the different trade-offs and the different options around a more decentralized internet. I think that is really important to me as well. There are a bunch of other areas also, but those are probably the 2 biggest that I'm focused on these days.
Okay, great. And we all can read a lot about those on the TechDirt blog. Mike has a lot of recent posts up as well, about these issues I've seen. One of the things I was curious to ask you, when we used to bring you over to Edinburgh back in the day, to Scotland, one of the things I always found interesting you talked about was like basically your theory of innovation,
Mhm.
and where that came from in Silicon Valley and so on. So I wondered if you, I'm not sure if it's changed or if it's still the same, but I wondered if you could like just update us on your recent thinking of, uh, on that, and why is the Silicon Valley area so innovative, and where's that come from?
Yeah, I haven't talked about this in a long time, so I'm sort of dredging up some memories. But yeah, no, I do think I don't think my views have changed that much. There are some elements that I think have maybe been adjusted, but the idea being, and if I had known you were going to ask this, I might have, found some of the old research and everything. But
Right.
the general idea is I think there's very strong evidence that, the way innovation works is through the kind of free flow and sharing of ideas and the ability to sort of build on ideas. The main thing that humans have that is better than any other, animal species is our ability to sort of think these things through and figure out ways to improve on stuff, and constantly and to pass that along and to build on these ideas. And the evidence of like how innovation actually works and how economic growth comes about is because the power of the idea as a kind of infinite resource, right? So, when people think about most industries, they think about, taking resources, scarce resources, and, turning them into widgets. And that is, that's one part of innovation is like, taking one thing and making it more useful. But the way you're making it more useful is by having ideas of how can I take, these sort of unrefined resources and turning them into useful widgets in some form or another. But the really powerful thing is the idea and then the execution on that idea to turn it into something useful. And then the real power of innovation is then continuing to take that further, right? You can build these widgets, but then you can realize like, oh, wait, we can do more with it. And the way you do that is have more people think through, like, how can I take this and make it better? How can I improve on this? And that constant sort of improvement on these ideas and this constant increase in ability to make ideas and make products better and to better serve the needs of people and better figure out better solutions to everything, is the core of innovation. And so the thing that is important to me in thinking about innovation is how do we keep that flywheel going? How do we have more ideas flowing? How do we have more people with the ability to sort of weigh in and have their and give their views on it? There's this sort of myth out there that I find troubling about the way that innovation works, which is that you have the sort of lone inventor in a garage somewhere who, is tinkering away in the dark for 20 years and has the big aha moment and suddenly comes out of the garage with this great new invention that changes the world. And that's, there may be some cases of that. I don't know that I've ever found an actual one. The reality is that everything is sort of incremental. Take this idea. You might have a great idea, but like you're building on the work of other people and other people are building on the work of you. And it's this back and forth thing. And there's tons of evidence of how that happens in Silicon Valley. And one of the reasons why Silicon Valley, has been historically this great sort of, engine of ideas and innovation, which is that you have all of these people around and they're sharing ideas. And so people who haven't experienced it to some extent, think that it's like, oh, you have these companies here and they work on these great ideas, but and there are studies to back this up. Part of the reason why some of the companies have been so successful is because other people not at their company are working on the same problems at the same time, and they might go out for a beer or coffee or whatever afterwards and have a discussion, and just by getting somebody else's perspective on it who isn't even working at the same company, suddenly they get that's where the aha comes from. It's this sharing of idea and this sort of percolation of different thoughts that allow people to realize like, oh wait, this is a better solution. And I think like all of us have probably experienced this in one way or another. I mean, everyone who's an entrepreneur or of any kind has ideas, right? And we have strong opinions about what is going to be the best thing. And it's incredible how many times, at least I've experienced this, and most people I've talked to who are entrepreneurial have had this same experience where, like, you've thought through these things, you believe in all of these ideas, and you'll have a conversation with somebody who isn't even in the space, or who's just, sort of tangentially related to it, and you explain to them what they're doing, and they'll ask you a simple question. They'll be like, oh, have you ever thought about using it for Y? And all of a sudden you're like, oh crap, like that's like the most obvious thing in the world. I've been working on this for 5 years and it never even occurred to me to do it that way. And then you're like, but wait, that's brilliant. Like just this feeding in of like little different ideas that spark stuff. Humans are smart, but in some ways we're dumb. We can't see all the different perspectives, and we can't see all the different variables. And that's why, like, having other people, suggest stuff and bring in different ideas is where the big breakthroughs always seem to come from. And so, I think that we need to encourage more sort of sharing of ideas and sharing of information, and the recognition that, when we can build the sort of big breakthroughs that everybody can then go further on, that's where the real innovation comes from, rather than kind of like hoarding all of our ideas and just saying like, oh, I'm going to lock all this up, I'm not going to let anyone else use my ideas, and thinking that that's where the innovation is actually going to come from.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Yeah, that's brilliant. And James has given us some useful comments here about the Scottish Enlightenment in the 18th, 19th century was a result of people sharing ideas with each other. Yeah, absolutely, James. David Hume, James Hutton, Adam Smith, and so forth. Yeah, great. And then the other thing one of the areas we'd like to get your perspective on is, like, if you have any advice for entrepreneurs or any insight into, scaling up a startup. Like, what does it, when does a startup kind of become a scale up or a growing company? How should entrepreneurs think about that? And any sort of insights into actually, how do you scale a company? What does it mean to scale, and how does one do it from your perspective? I'm sure it's easier said than done, but
yeah, no, it is. It's I think it is a real challenge, and it's and a lot of times I think, like, well, this is maybe a little bit cynical, but I think like people tell you there is like the right way to sort of to scale up or selling something, right? I mean, like a lot of times it's accidental, right? I mean, it's like you need to find, the terrible phrase is the product market fit, right? The issue is like, figuring out the best way to find something that people actually need. And then it's just a roller coaster. Then you're sort of along for the ride. The question then is like, how do you manage that in a way that is useful and isn't going to, throw you off the roller coaster, I guess, if we're going to stick with that analogy. But to me, the biggest thing is always like, figuring out how are you best serving your customer. I've been meaning to write, excuse me, something in my throat. I've been meaning to write an article that's been sort of in the back of my head for a while, and I haven't quite gotten to it yet. About, and I've written similar things before, but I'm noticing a lot more of it lately as well. The sort of the difference between long-term thinking and short-term thinking with startups, right? And I think a lot of startups, for very good reasons, are very focused on sort of short-term thinking, which is like, we need to survive, right? But I think some of the best startups in the world were the ones that took a really long-term vision on things. And it's funny, like this goes back to something that Professor Alan McAdams taught me at Cornell. If I don't know if you Klaus, or if you remember all this, but like,
yeah, I remember him. I don't know if I remember exactly what he taught, but maybe it'll come back. But,
no, it was funny because he taught this class that has really stuck with me to this day. There were a bunch of different things in it, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but one of the things he just taught was like this idea of like, the successful companies have a kind of North Star goal. Like that's their vision. That's what they're going for. But the recognition that like nobody knows the path from here to there, right? And the most important thing in terms of like building a successful company is recognizing how often and how frequently you have to iterate on that path from here to that North Star. You have that North Star, you know what you're trying to accomplish. That's not like your product, that is your mission, right? Like what is it that you're trying to do? How are you trying to make the world a better place? What is the overarching vision, mission of the company? And then all you're doing is, you have to have everybody at the company aligned and sort of recognizing what that vision is. Everybody has to agree. Everybody has to recognize it. And then you just empower the people to figure out like, what are the steps that we're going to take, and recognize it's never a straight path. It can't be a straight path. You're going to zigzag. But the important point is that as you zigzag, that you sort of recalibrate with each zig and zag, that like, I need to get to that North Star, and that is what we're aiming for. And we're going to learn as we go. And we have these ideas, and we're going to test them. We're going to see whether or not that works, and then we have to adjust. And I think that's the most important point of any kind of startup. If you're trying to grow and be successful, is figure out like, how am I going to reach that vision, but recognizing that it's a constantly adjusting process.
Okay, great. Yeah, really interesting. It kind of reminded me of another question. It's a little bit tangential to that, but I'm curious to know what you think about the whole, the B Corporation and the B Corporation movement, especially like B Labs.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think it's wonderful. I think it's great. I think we need more like that. In fact, I put that in the same camp as something like the long-term stock exchange, which is another sort of thing where it's like recognizing that there are more things in this world than just like pleasing the shareholders every 3 months. I think that, I actually think, this is a longer this is another thing I've been thinking about writing about, but like, I think the idea of like that fiduciary duty, as a board member or an executive at a company, is to maximize shareholder value on a quarterly basis, is one of the most damaging ideas that we've ever had. And it does tremendous damage in the world, and it leads to incredibly short-term thinking, which doesn't help you get you towards that sort of North Star goal that you're aiming for. And that we need to recognize, like, you can maximize shareholder value in the short term, but that will kill the company in the long term. And that doesn't make sense to me. So I think that, anyone running a company should be set up in a way that they can recognize all of the different, stakeholders. I hate the term stakeholders, but I'll say stakeholders, all the different parts of the ecosystem and what it is that you're trying to do. And that's why, so like the concept of the B Corp and the concept of the long-term stock exchange, I think are both really good mechanisms for recognizing that there is this world beyond like having to make your shareholders happiest in very short-term increments. There's this other idea that I've toyed around with, and I've mentioned it a few times, and people all think I'm crazy for it. So I'll throw it out here because why not? The whole thing with quarterly reporting, and it is obviously for public companies, right? It's different, entrepreneurial startups is always different, but I do wonder if there are interesting ideas in here, is that, you have this weird world with public companies where every 3 months they have to report numbers, and they have to do it in a way like, so, there are expectations, and you have to meet the expectations, or if you surpass the expectations, your stock will go up. If you don't meet the expectations, the stock will go down. People play all sorts of games to try and, sort of keep, Wall Street happy in some way or another. And I almost wonder if like in this weird sort of, trick, one option is to go for like the long-term stock exchange where you don't have to report quarterly numbers. You can take a longer term view on things. But I also wonder if like the opposite route gets you in the same way, where you have this sort of, I've described as sort of radical transparency, where like a company reveals its numbers on a daily basis, like every day, or just has like an open dashboard and says like, we don't need to report quarterly numbers because we're going to make every day's numbers open, and it's just there. And then you don't have the issue of like Wall Street having to predict, what are you going to do? It's like, there's a board game. I wonder if have you ever seen the board game? It's called Scotland Yard. It's like an old board game. I played it as a kid. And it's, it's about Scotland Yard, right? Or the game works where you have, I don't even know if it's described as like a robbery suspect or someone plays the criminal, and they're traveling through London, on a map. The board game is a map, and they're traveling through London, and everybody else is Scotland Yard, and they're trying to track down the criminal. And you have to play with like 5 players, or if you have fewer, they play multiple characters, whatever. And the Scotland Yard players are all trying to track down the criminal. And the way it works is that the criminal has a pad, and they're marking down where they are. But I think it's like 5 moves, they have to appear on the map. The rest of the time, they're not on the map. They're just writing it down so you can go back and check. And then they appear, and then the Scotland Yard players have to try and converge on them, but they disappear for another 5 rounds. And that's kind of the way the stock market works, where it's like, I pop up every 3 months, I tell you my numbers, and then everybody's got to try and converge on like, where's it going to be 3 months from now? And it's the same thing as Scotland Yard. It's this weird sort of stupid game that everybody plays. And I think it's really distracting and problematic for companies that are trying to build like, long-term sustainable, successful companies that are good for the world. And so, in some sense, this sort of radical transparency idea is kind of, maybe it's silly and maybe it's impractical and maybe it causes there are other factors obviously involved in it. But like, there's this part of me that wonders like, what would the world look like if companies did that? If companies actually revealed all of that information and and they were just totally open about it, and you don't have to like have Wall Street people trying to guess what your numbers are going to be and where you're going to appear 3 months from now. But
I just put up this link to this book I'm reading now, actually called Better Business: How the B Corp Movement is Remaking Capitalism by, it's actually a Johnson School professor.
Oh, okay.
Now, Christopher Marquis wrote it. Yeah, he's teaching social enterprise and B Corps in Johnson now. So, and that's one of the hallmarks he talks about of, the real differentiators in B corporations and so on is that transparency, like just what you're talking about, like just how crucial transparency is. And I mean, the ultimate would be like daily transparency, right? So, but that is one of the, measurement categories of social enterprises and businesses are going to do good, essentially.
And like I've been working on this thing, and I don't know what it's going to be. It might turn into a book. It might turn into a sort of a big content series. It might turn into both. I'm not entirely sure where it is, but I'm sort of trying to get people to rethink all of this. This is part of my problem in sort of trying to write it all down. And I turned it into like a book proposal, which is like 30 pages. And part of the problem was like, there were so many different pieces to it. I wasn't quite sure, like, how do I get people into it? Where do I start? So like I started, and then I was like, well, this isn't the best place to start. So I wrote like a new starting above it. And I was like, this isn't the best place. So I wrote a new start above it. And now like my original starting is on like page, 17 or something crazy. But like just trying to get people to rethink like this view that we have of how like, free market capitalism works today, and like, and thinking through better ways that we might build a world in which, the profit motive and pricing, those are really powerful things and really powerful tools. And I think they're actually really useful. But there are times where like they've led to some really distorted results, and sort of rethinking, how do we structure the world so that, we can have the incentives for good innovation and for making the world a better place. And those things shouldn't be in conflict with one another. And so it's the kind of thing that like, I think challenges a lot of like the way lots of people view the world. So a lot of people might hate it. But, I think it's time that like a lot of our thinking about the world is based on this sort of very industrial view of the world. And, we've spent, the last 150 years really kind of, or more, depending on how you look at it, viewing everything through this sort of very industrial lens. And, one of the powerful things about the internet is that it's beginning to chip away at some of those assumptions. And, in part because we're dealing in issues that, historically have always been about scarcity, right? Where, you're taking scarce resources and building scarce widgets. And a lot of that breaks down when you start to talk about information and the flows of information. And so much of what is happening in the world today, the internet is all flows of information and communication. The economics of that are not necessarily different, but they impact things in different ways. When you're used to a world in which the vast majority of things are about scarcity and only a little bit about information, and then you switch to a world in which the majority is information and much less of it is about scarcity, the whole world sort of turns upside down. And I don't think we've really processed that. And I think it's actually leading to a lot of the sort of trouble that people are having with like trying to understand the world today and trying to process it. And whoops, I just kicked my microphone. And so, I'm trying to figure out a way to explain it, but it's a complex subject.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And so finally, before we turn it over to some Q&A here, I just wondered, Masnick always gave me like really good book recommendations. I remember some of them when I first got to Silicon Valley. Mike recommended some great books and I read them all. They definitely like still stick in my mind and help me understand, like the Silicon Valley or whatever. But so I'm wondering now, like, do you have any like current book recommendations for us? Anything? I'll write them down in chat.
Yeah, sure.
People.
Let's see. A lot of the books I've been reading lately might not seem relevant, but I think they are. And a lot of them are actually about sort of free speech. So there's this great book that just came out a few months ago called Free Speech. It's like Free Speech, A History from Socrates to Social Media. And it is by this guy, Jacob Machangama, who is based, where is he based? Somewhere in Europe. And it is absolutely fascinating. And it's literally what it says. It's like a deep history of free speech and like what it meant in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and then, all the way up through the present. And really super deeply researched and really, really fascinating. It tells all these stories and a bunch of stories I didn't know. I will say, I should admit, like as a disclosure, he does mention me a couple times in the book, which I had no idea about when I got it. It was actually kind of weird. I picked up the book. The book is it's a big, heavy book. I think it's like 500 pages, and I literally just like flipped open randomly to a page, and like my name was in it. I was like, well, that's weird. I'm not in the book very often, but there's a little mention of me. But I think that one was really great. And then the other one that I've been reading recently is also sort of about free speech, and it's do I have it? I do have it right behind me, which is this one. It's The United States of Anonymous, by this guy Jeff Kossoff, who's a professor at the Naval Academy, and he's written. So this is his second really interesting book. He wrote a book a few years ago all about Section 230, which is like this U.S. law that's really important to the internet, which was fascinating. And then he's written this new book about. This book just came out a few months ago about anonymity and sort of the nature of U.S. law and anonymity and sort of the importance of anonymity and also the dangers of anonymity. And it's a really well-researched, really, really thoughtful book. I think, a lot of people have sort of gut reactions to like, is anonymous speech good or bad? And I think very few people have informed opinions about it, but this book really, really helps inform people on that. I think
I just put up the link and I see it is reunion weekend. So one for the alma mater, I see it's published by Cornell University Press.
That's right. Jeff's books are all published by Cornell University Press. That's right. So yeah, I think those are the two that that are top of mind right now.
Thank you, Mike. Much appreciated. I'll definitely get those myself. And I wanted to just open it up now. I'd love to for some others to ask questions. If you like, you can put your hand up and so James,
can I go
please.
first?
Sure.
I like what you're saying about the internet is all about information, and of course, making sense of the information if anyone has read 1984, war is peace. And we're in a situation right now where there's a lot of players invested in getting a story that supports their agenda, whether it's pro-Russia, pro-Ukraine, and then we have the global warming and all these other things. How do you make sense of this attempt to brainwash us and give us fake news, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, this is the huge challenge, right? This is the thing that everybody's sort of talking about. It's this kind of interesting experience, right? As someone who sort of embraced the internet in the early days and certainly was among the crew of people who were saying like, this opens up communications for everyone and this will be great. We'll have like more speech, more ability to communicate, and therefore, only good things can come of that. And so, I think that was maybe a little naive, as I've discovered, and that like also people can abuse that, right? And so you have this issue now where, there's a big struggle going on in terms of like figuring out how do we handle this flood of information. And I think that there are a number of different factors here, and there is no easy solution. There is only complex solutions, and they're much bigger and more involved than I think anyone wants to make them out to be. So I think a lot of people are really reaching for like there must be an easy solution, and so some of that is like, some people want to pass new laws that try and ban certain types of speech. Misinformation has to be banned, or anonymity needs to be banned. That's one that is often popular. And I think that those solutions don't actually understand the problem and won't do much to help. To some extent, I think that a lot of what we're seeing with like, we'll loosely use the term fake news. To me, it's like, it's propaganda. There are forms of propaganda and there's confirmation bias, and you're sort of dealing with those issues, confirmation bias and propaganda. But a lot of that is really shining a light on deeper societal issues. Not all of it, certainly, but I think a lot of it is, showing things that are happening in the world that were always happening in the world, but that were not as present, or people were not as aware of it as in the past. Rather than taking that and taking the shining of the light on deeper societal issues and deeper societal problems, a lot of people are effectively blaming the messenger and saying, because we're seeing all of this nonsense spread on Facebook is the problem, as opposed to the fact that we have lots of people who are ready and willing to believe nonsense. I think that, a better world is one in which, people are better prepared and better able to deal with that society itself, there, whether it's issues around, there's all sorts of issues that need to be dealt with as a society. There are mental health issues, there are educational issues, there are, poverty issues, there are criminal justice issues, there are civil justice issues, all of which are things that governments should be in the business of solving, and aren't for a variety of reasons. And then it just comes back to a bunch of people arguing about it, and we're going to blame the platform that they argue on. And I don't think that necessarily gets us anywhere. So I wish that we had more willingness to explore which of the issues that are sort of brought to light by social media are actually larger societal issues, and how do we try and solve those larger societal issues? Which issues in the world are made worse by social media, which, there's an argument that certain issues are made worse, and which issues are made better by social media. I mean, I think the ability for people to communicate has also solved. I mean, the fact that like I'm sitting here, like, in my home office, being able to talk to everybody around the globe is kind of amazing and kind of wonderful for lots of people, including me. And so I think there are lots of good things. And I think a lot of people sort of ignore that when they focus just on the bad things. So I think we need a lot bigger understanding. I'm reminded of, and I think there's a new book coming out soon also all about this in particular, but when the printing press was first invented, and Gutenberg's printing press in 14 whatever, there was this massive upheaval this idea that like, the riffraff could publish anything, and even then it was a lot more difficult than it is today on the internet. And it really took about a century. And even then you could argue it never really solved, but like, there was about a century of pure upheaval and people freaking out about this idea that people could publish stuff, and that stuff might be stuff that the people in power, whether it was the church or the government, didn't like, and that was bad, and we had to ban stuff. And it really took kind of a century for people to sort of come to grips with the idea that like, oh wait, like society has to understand this. Like people are going to publish stuff, and sometimes the stuff is not going to be great. But, for the most part, it's probably good that more people can publish stuff and that we can get more ideas. And to get back to the point that I made at the beginning of like the way that innovation occurs is when you have that free flow of ideas, and you want that free flow of ideas to lead to more innovation. And so, I think we're in that sort of 100-year period after the invention of the printing press where there's kind of upheaval and society itself hasn't quite adapted to this new world, and things are weird. And so that leads to people lashing out. And the easiest target is on like, oh, well, this internet thing is the problem, even if it's really just shining light on a deeper problem. I don't know if that actually answers your question, but like, yeah, I mean, I like, there is no easy answer to it. But I wish that like, I wish that, and there are some people, I should be clear. Like there are plenty of people who are looking at it as a kind of nuanced challenge that we need to look at within the sort of wider ecosystem of society itself. And how do we deal with these things? Unfortunately, like the loudest voices seem to be just like, platitudes and looking for easy answers and pointing fingers. And I don't think that that's all that helpful.
Okay. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks.
Theodora, would you like to ask a question next?
Yes, thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
What legal challenges have you faced, Mike, in growing your business?
I mean, that's an interesting question. I mean, there's a few different answers to that, right? So some of it is just like sort of purely policy based, right? So as different governments have changed laws in different places, like how does that impact us? And, there have been some, we're small, so we sort of, skate under, some of the concerns that might impact larger people, but like, different laws certainly have an impact. And even things like, trying to understand like the GDPR, was kind of like a massive deal for us. And actually like for a variety of reasons, we, so TechDirt itself, was supported with advertising for a long time. We don't have any advertising on the site, and we haven't had advertising on the site for about a year now, actually more than a year. And part of that was actually because of a challenge under the GDPR, even though we were trying to do everything to be in compliance, and we have no interest in doing any of the sort of evil things that the GDPR was in theory put in place to stop. Like we don't want to collect data on people. We don't want to sell data on people. We just want to, be able to write our content and have some advertising on it to make some money to help pay for to do that. And like in an ideal world, I would love to be able to do that with zero tracking whatsoever. I don't want to track anyone. Like it's like, but the nature of the advertising business today is that you kind of can't do that. And in part because like the advertisers want to see like how many people are seeing. And so like it becomes really complex. And after a certain point, like it got to the point where we were just like, you know what, like it's actually not worth it to us to make any money from advertising. And we have to figure out other ways to make money. And so we ended up ditching the advertising on the site, in part because of GDPR. There are a couple other sort of related laws. And even so, like we're still facing, we've faced threats over stuff that we've done, where it's like, look, we are trying to be, I think we are probably better than 99% of all other websites on there in terms of like how little we track and how much we've done to not track people on our site. Like we don't care. We don't want that data. We don't want to do it. And yet we still get threatened by stuff. And that involves like having to talk to lawyers and figure out what do we do, more directly. I'm sorry?
When you say threatened, have you been sued at all, or has there just been threats made in general?
On the privacy front, we've only been threatened. We've never been sued. We have faced lawsuits. The lawsuits we've faced have been around like defamation.
Mhm.
And so that's another issue that I think is really a big deal. And so like we faced one that was very high profile that there's a lot of there was a lot of news reporting on, that we got sued in 2017 by a guy who was very upset with what we had written about him, even though everything we had written about him was entirely truthful and accurate. But he had recently received a large settlement from another lawsuit and sort of tried to double down and use that to sue us for $15 million, which is not money that we have. And we ended up fighting that lawsuit for 2.5 years. And eventually got out of it. So there's public information there. That was like hugely damaging, frankly. It was 2.5 years of absolute soul crushing nonsense. If you can avoid being sued in your life, please avoid being sued in your life. It is not worth it. We're currently also being sued again. I am dealing with another lawsuit, which I'm not going to talk about because it's tough to talk about any lawsuit when you're in the middle of it. So I'm not going to talk about that one. But again, like lawsuits are just, people always talk about kind of like the monetary aspect of dealing with a lawsuit, and it is ridiculous. And you will spend a ton of money dealing with a lawsuit. But honestly, much worse is just like the time, attention, like just mental wearing down of doing that instead of building the business and instead of working on the business is just absolutely crushing. And when you reach a certain level that you're big enough that you have like your own legal department, like maybe it's not quite as bad, but that also means you're a target of a lot more lawsuits generally. But I really think that and this is partly worse in the US than elsewhere in the world, just partly because of the nature of our legal system. It's lawsuits are really, really damaging and really, really dangerous and just take so much out of you. And I think that's a really big concern. And one of the things that I fight for specifically in the US are something called anti-SLAPP laws, which are that came out of this recognition that usually very wealthy and very powerful people were using completely ridiculous, bogus defamation lawsuits to silence people. And so there have been a series of laws in place that have tried to help that. So if you're sued for in a situation where it's clearly just to silence someone, that it helps you get out of those lawsuits quicker. And in some cases, allow you to recover legal fees. One of the things with this is in the U.S. context, which is different from most places in the world, is that in the U.S. sort of people pay their own way, right? So even if you win a lawsuit, even if you're sued and you win, for the most part, you still have to pay your own lawyers. In lots of other parts of the world, if you sue someone and then you lose, you have to pay their legal fees also. I personally think that's a much better system, but that's not the way it works in the U.S. for the most part. There are a few scenarios in which it does, and one of those is where you have anti-SLAPP laws in place. But right now it's basically about half of the states in the US have those laws. The federal government does not. Every once in a while, the Congress will introduce a federal anti-SLAPP law. And there's one coming soon, I believe. But they never go anywhere. And I think it actually, for a country that prides itself on the First Amendment and free speech, our legal system is structured in a way that it's ridiculously easy to try and silence someone. And I have really big concerns about that as someone who sort of feels like I'm a victim of it with some of the lawsuits I've dealt with.
Thank you, Mike. I have another quick question that extends off from what you were just talking about in regards to lawsuits. Were you able to get business insurance that covers the nature of your reporting?
So that is a big story that I'm not sure I want to talk about publicly. Yeah. So here's what I'll say, and I'm not going to go off of my own experience. I will talk about, there's a great article that the publication Mother Jones wrote probably about 6 or 7 months ago. in which they were talking about they've been sued a bunch of times, and they talked about their experience with insurance. And there's this belief, and I've heard this from lawyers, and I've heard this from other people who sort of think that like, oh, business insurance covers all of these issues. The reality is no, it does not. And even if you can get insurance, it creates a whole bunch of problems. And so like the story that Mother Jones had, and I will just say that this is not atypical, is that they had been sued a few times. Mother Jones's publication, they write about the powerful and wealthy, and they've been sued a number of times, including they had one case where this guy was just this billionaire from Idaho was just totally focused on destroying them. And they eventually won, but it cost them millions of dollars. So they talked about their experience with insurance, which was basically because they were getting sued, their insurance company dropped them. So they had to find other insurance companies. And then like one by one, the insurance companies were like, no, no, no. I forget the number that they put in the article, but I think they went through like 40 something different insurance companies before they would find one who would actually insure them. And of course, like the cost of that insurance was way more than anyone else, and the coverage was way lower. And I believe that is very typical. And I think that most people who are in the media business find the same thing. And the idea that media insurance or business insurance that has a media component to it protects you is not exactly true. And I can have a more direct conversation with you
Sure.
Maybe privately, but
Yeah,
not,
exactly.
not publicly.
Might be a good one to do one-on-one. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, very good, Mike. Thank you. We'll
Thank
take
you, Mike.
one. Thank you, Theodore. We'll take one more quick question, then we'll break out into rooms real quick. So Darcy,
Yeah.
Go ahead. You can ask, please.
So yeah, I started an educational toy business, and like 2 days ago, I went to a mom community to get some market insights. And one of their biggest concern these days was like, how to discipline kids from getting addicted to their, like mobile phone and mobile games and, like social network services. So you like as a technology influencer, I just wonder if you have ever thought about this, or are there any ways to dealing with it?
Yeah, no, it's a challenge, and I'll say also as a parent of two children, like I'm dealing with that on a personal basis as well. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really conflicting research on this as well, and I think it's actually part of the challenge is that. There's some research that suggests that these things are unhealthy and that there's addictive qualities to it. And there's other research that actually disagrees with that. And I think that we're at this stage right now that we don't really know. And I think it's really important for there, one, to be a lot more research. And I think that on that side of it, I wish that the different companies, especially the social media companies, were more open to working with researchers. They've done some stuff. I think it would be a lot better. I think that, and this is my opinion at this stage, right? I think that there are always challenges, but a lot of that, again, this gets back to a little bit what I was talking about with kind of like the fake news propaganda stuff. A lot of it is there are underlying issues, right? So, there are people who can handle access to social media and to educational services and tools and whatever without problem. And then there are some people who can't. And what we need is not necessarily to say like, we need one rule for everyone that says like, like kids should not use this, which is the way that policymaking is done right now. But a better setup would be like to recognize like, how do we more quickly identify who is at risk from these things, and how do we, structure it so that those people can be dealt with without sort of ruining and taking away the stuff that is actually useful and valuable. I think that there is an element of kind of, what's referred to as a moral panic around some of this stuff, where it's like, because there are some examples of people who have trouble with, putting down TikTok or whatever, that is, TikTok is clearly bad and must be dealt with. I don't think that's accurate. And in fact, like, there's this report that got passed around a lot, because last fall, I don't know how much you follow this, was like, the Wall Street Journal released what they called the Facebook papers. They didn't release, they reported on the Facebook papers, which were internal Facebook documents that were leaked by an employee there named Frances Hogan. And the main part of the first story that the Wall Street Journal did, which has now become like this main talking point that lots of people repeat, is this idea that Facebook had, or Instagram, which is, owned by Facebook, had evidence internally that, like teenage girls using Instagram felt worse about themselves. The whole thing is like they knew it and they didn't do anything about it. And obviously, like, that's not good. Nobody wants, people to feel bad about themselves using a product. But the reality is, like, when you look at the actual study, which came out later, and now you can see the actual study that Facebook did. First of all, it showed a few different things. One was that for many, many more, a lot more people in that age group, it made them feel better about themselves, not worse. There was a small segment that made them feel worse, but nobody reported on that. And to me, that seemed very, very odd, where it's like, you're having both of these effects. And like, the interesting thing for me, like from a researcher standpoint, would be like, well, let's understand why. Like, why for some people, why for like a large group of people did this actually help them and make them feel better and give them more self-esteem? And why was this other group that went the other way? And how do we deal with that? And some of it is like just the nature of, like, especially teenagers, boys and girls, like, people, they're changing, they're turning into adults, and there's a struggle there. And like, lots of people, there are lots of stories of teenagers being depressed, right? That's part of, in some sense, being a teenager. That doesn't mean we should accept it and be, say, oh, that's fine, don't worry about it. But I think understanding, like, how do we find the people who are having trouble, and how do we help them without saying like, oh, well, the problem is just the social media. So, from my standpoint, the issue is always like, how do we find the people who need the help and deal with it? I had done this research project last year, which was really, really striking to me on this. And I don't know if this will exactly get to your point, but maybe it's helpful, which is, there was a lot of concern about specifically eating disorders, and communities on Facebook and TikTok and a couple other sites that were sort of focused on eating disorders, mainly among teenage girls. And the sort of gut reaction in some of these communities and some of the content in there is, I would say, kind of horrific. And I think a lot of people, just looking at it is like, oh my gosh, this is like, you're encouraging people to harm themselves. And so, like, the gut reaction is like, this is bad. This should be blocked. We should take this down. This is, the sites have to be more proactive about this. But then what the research showed was like really, really eye-opening and presented as like, there's a lot more nuance here and a lot more difficulty, because they studied sites that did try to take down those communities and found, first of all, that it didn't work, that the same people figured out ways around, like, so, suddenly they changed the language. They were no longer talking about eating disorders or whatever. They started to come up with coded language, and they were having the same conversation anyway, except it was a little bit harder for the people to monitor and to try and do something about it, because they were always going to, so like, there is this element of like, they will always find a way to have that conversation, even if you try and shut it down. So that's an issue. And then the second thing that they found that was really, really fascinating was that a lot of these, not all, but a lot of these communities actually created a path for people who had an eating disorder to get better, in that some people would be a part of that community and then start to, talk to other people in there and give them a path out and give them help, and not in sort of a scolding, parental way, but more of a friendly, supportive, like, hey, I don't know enough about how it works, but like, there were all of these examples of people giving a path to help the people in those communities, rather than to drive them further into danger. That wasn't true in all cases, and in some cases, obviously, it was leading people to do serious health damage to themselves, and that's a concern as well. But like, it was a really, really complex subject, and that there wasn't an easy answer. And so, I wish that more people would approach it in this way, that is like, we recognize there's lots of good stuff, and that there's potentially bad stuff, and we need to figure out ways to deal with the bad stuff, but not in a way that's just like shut it down, make it go away, but towards like how do we make this constructive and helpful for the people who are having trouble with it. And so, I think that applies to kind of addiction and other issues with children, is like, how do we do it in a constructive way and not one that is just like, no, like, go away, like block this, because I don't think that works. And I think that causes more trouble in the long run, and doesn't necessarily even teach, again, obviously this depends on the age of the children and what's going on, but doesn't teach the children ways to cope themselves with different challenges that they're facing as well. So sort of a long answer. I don't know if it actually answers your question at all, but there's it is a really challenging situation, but it's one that where a lot of nuance and complexities are at play.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Very thought-provoking.
Thought-provoking.
You've given
Thank
us
you, Mike.
lots of stuff to think about. So I just want to move us on now. So here is the game that Mike was talking about, and you can see the URL at the top here, startuptrail.engine.is. So I'm going to take a look at this later on. Before we move out to our breakout rooms, just want to remind those people who came late on the call, if you're going to be taking part in our £10,000 startup race, make sure you sign the rules. And here is the URL here. I should have given you a fancy URL to remember, but apologies for not doing that. So of course you can always pause the video once we've uploaded it. Okay, so we're going to do our breakout rooms now. Hopefully everybody will be allocated into their room, and hopefully Mike will be able to stay on for a little bit longer just to answer a few more questions.
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to open all the rooms now.
Thank you, Mike.
Sure.
Thanks. Yeah, but thanks, Mike.
Awesome. Thank you.
So I'll join with Mike.
Okay. Yep. That sounds good, James.
I'm going to stop the recording